What's up, everybody? In this video, I'm going to talk about knee cave. Now, I'm not trying to make a one-size-fits-all, end-all, be-all video on knee cave here. I just want to talk about what's worked in my experience and what hasn't. So there's a lot of stuff out there that people say to do for this problem. First of all, we have to talk about, does knee cave even matter? There's two reasons why knee cave could matter, and the first is pain. A lot of people who allow significant knee cave over time will develop some sort of pain in their knees, tendinitis, or just some sort of dysfunction. So if that's you, you should probably fix it because it's going to prevent the amount of training that you can do in the long run, and it's just going to make your life less enjoyable. The second reason is that in my experience, most lifters who now allow significant knee cave are inefficient when it comes time to max out their squat. What I mean by that is, let's say that they could triple something. Well, normally if you could triple something, that's about 90% of your max. For someone who allows a lot of knee cave, it might be more like 95%. And the reason that this happens, in my opinion, is that knee cave is an intensity-based form error, meaning the higher the intensity in terms of RPE or in terms of how close you are to your 1RM, the more the knee cave is going to be an issue. So they might have a smooth triple with only moderate knee cave, and then on their 1RM, there's just a ton of knee cave, and that ends up being this huge sticking point that doesn't allow them to do much more weight. So if either of those fit you, then knee cave is something that you could potentially address. If it doesn't cause you pain and you don't have very much of it, and you're just a lot stronger allowing a tiny bit of knee cave, it's probably not the end of the world to allow a tiny bit of knee cave. It's kind of like backgrounding on the deadlift. Now, let's say you do need to fix your knee cave for whatever reason, or you just want to because you're a technical perfectionist. There's a lot of different ways to approach this, right? There's mobility. There's your setup. How wide are you setting up to squat? There's your technical cues. What are you thinking about during the lift? And then, of course, there's musculature. Is this a weak muscle group? Now, you can eliminate a lot of these things pretty quickly. Some people suggest that you should squat with a band around your knee. Now, this works, in my opinion, for novices who don't know what it feels like to have their knees pushed out all the way. A lot of people claim a lot of benefits for activation drills, and really, I don't get a ton out of them, and I've never seen many people that do. The people that do are novices who really don't even know what it feels like in the first place. So if you get a novice who thinks that their knees are pushed out all the way, but they're just not, sometimes a band around the knees can give them the proprioceptive cueing that they need to really see what it feels like when their knees are coming in or not coming in. But for the most part, if you're aware of what it feels like to have your knees out, to me, this is not a super good way to address the problem, especially in more advanced lifters. If knee cave is already the limiting factor in your squat because of just musculature, then putting a band around your knees could be a great accessory exercise, but it's going to severely limit the loads that all of the rest of the muscles are handling. So it's almost by emphasizing that weak muscle or muscle group, it makes it really one of the only things that's getting a training effect from that squat. So I don't recommend it beyond perhaps as an accessory exercise for fixing knee cave in more intermediate and advanced lifters. Now, another common problem that causes knee cave is mobility, or people think it's a common one, but it usually isn't. So mobility can be eliminated fairly quickly. If you can do a proper squat with the bar with one plate and your knees stay out over your toes, your issue is not mobility. Now, if you can't keep your knees out over your toes, even with the bar, then you could potentially address the mobility problem that you have. But for most of you who've been doing this for a while, you're wasting your time doing all these different kinds of stretches and mobilizations because it's not the issue. Now, the next thing I would say is cueing. Cueing, again, can help for somebody who is just doing the movement wrong, even with light weights. Now, for those of you who do know how to do the movement correctly, in my experience, this is an issue where cueing doesn't make that big of a difference. Okay, if your knees are coming in because there's weak muscles, they're going to come in even when you think knees out, knees out, knees out, knees out. That's been my experience. Now, if you've eliminated mobility because you know you can do it with the bar, you can do it with one plate, if technical cueing doesn't make that big of a difference for you, the next thing that you have to look at is your stance width. So a lot of people can fix some of this problem by just changing their stance width. So imagine that the triceps were the weak muscle group in your bench press. and you decided to narrow your bench grip for some reason. Well, your bench is probably going to get weaker because a narrow grip on the bench press emphasizes the triceps more, and the triceps are your weak muscle group. If your weak muscle group in the squat are the muscles responsible for abduction of the femur, by taking a wider stance, you're only placing a greater relative demand on that group of muscles. So it's very similar to the weak tricep person moving their bench grip in. By moving your squat stance out, you're just emphasizing the muscles that you're already somewhat relatively weaker in. So one thing that you can immediately try is just narrowing your stance with the bit. If that doesn't work though, you really need to come back to this idea that this is a problem, at least in intermediate and advanced lifters, that is primarily musculature based. In other words, there's weak muscles that you need to address. And my experience with it is that knee cave happens because the weak muscle group here, primarily, the muscles in the hip responsible for abduction of the femur, are shifting load to the stronger muscle groups, the hamstrings, the glutes, the quads, etc., to help finish the lift. It's shifting the work away from those abducting muscles. So what you need to do to fix this is address that weak musculature. So let's talk about one of the things that people constantly recommend, and that's isolation for the abductors. So like the machines that you sit on and you push your knees out. A lot of people call them bad girls, right? You got bad girls where you open your legs and good girls where you close your legs. Well, in my experience, those machines are pretty much useless for most of you. When I tried using them for this problem, I was able to load up the whole stack and do like 15 to 20 reps without really trying. So, if I can put 300 pounds on this machine and do a bunch of reps with it, it's probably not going to have a ton of carryover to my actual squat. So what I do think works is something more specific. Now, you can try things like hip thrusts with your knees banded and things like that. But again, what really I have seen work, and what always works, even if it can take a little bit longer, is simply doing submaximal volume with weights that you can actually do the movement correctly at, and really hammering it. Doing more volume than you normally would because the weights are lighter, and just hammer that movement pattern at light weights. Now, this is potentially why knee cave can be such a hard problem to fix, because it's really a problem with your ego most of the time. Most people do not want to lessen the loads to do the movement properly. The other issue, of course, is that you have to be incredibly diligent about this. For example, a lot of people have had experiences, particularly like on those types of novice programs, right, where you reset to work on your form, you build all the way back up, and the same form problem is there after you build back up. So with knee cave, you have to be incredibly diligent about this and not allow this form mistake to creep back in slowly over time. The only way to do this is to have a coach yell at you from set to set, or to film each of your sets, review them afterwards. Now, in the short term, in lieu of a coach, film yourself. But another thing that can work, in my experience, for a short period of time, not for every time you squat for the rest of your life, is to squat in front of a mirror. It gives you instant feedback as to whether or not you're doing it correctly. Now, you don't want to end up relying on the mirror over time, so once you have somewhat of a good handle on it, and you've got a good proprioceptive feel for what's going on with your knees, move away from the mirror. But that's been my experience with knee cave, guys. Mobility is usually not the problem for most people. It can be for certain novices who are trying to squat too wide, but that's really the only time I've seen mobility be the issue. Cueing, in my experience, doesn't help people too much. The one exception there is sometimes people will cue knees out so much that they push their knees outside of their toes, and then the knees just come back into their proper alignment with the toes on the way up. So if you're actually pushing your knees out too much, thinking about a different cue or just dropping the knees out cue can help. But, my experience has also been that most people with knee cave know how to cue knees out. They know what it feels like to have their knees out. It's just the cue doesn't help. Now, the last thing, of course, is stance width. Some of you guys will have some luck by bringing your stance width in. And if you do, that means that the problem was muscular in nature. You had to get the weak muscle stronger. And that's going to be the fix for most of you guys who have this issue, unfortunately, is that you're going to need to take the weights down to something submaximal, very submaximal sometimes, and work on just doing the movement correctly for reps, for volume. And that's what's going to instill the new movement pattern. That's what's going to bring up the weak musculature over time, and that's what's going to fix the problem. So anyways, that's my thoughts on knee cave, guys. That's what's worked for me, what hasn't worked for me, and what hasn't worked for my clients, and also what has. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you liked the video, then like the video. If you're interested in coaching from me, you can find out more information in the description box, or you could just email me at izzy@powerliftingtwin.com. As always, my friends, have a nice day and best of luck with your training. Peace.